Yep, class is in session. Welcome to Voice of Reason. This is 3/16/2017, so March 16th. I believe it's a Thursday. I kind of lose track though. I'm a bit ADD, and that's actually what we're talking about today. Now, I've noticed a lot of mental health issues are kind of dumbed down. Most of the treatment that people get they're not getting treatment from, let's say, based on like the number one guy and whatever. In fact, there are some things that aren't even accepted yet, like complex PTSD. That's something that's not really even, that's really a internet only kind of thing. You're not going to find too many people who deal with complex PTSD. What also you're not going to find is the amend model for ADHD. Now, how is this whole thing different? Well, Dr. Amend started using SPECT imaging, I think, over 20 years ago. Now, that's kind of a measure of blood flow to the brain. I've kind of mistakenly called it like brain metabolism or something like that, but that was my mistake. It's a measure of blood flow to the brain, and believe it or not, blood flow can be different in different parts of the brain at different times. Depending on the activity, depending on your genetics, depending on all sorts of things. So we have this, what the website, Amend Clinics, by the way, and amendclinics.com, I believe it is. Yep, that's it. So on the website, two of the things that's right up front with ADD, ADHD, I know it's been called just AD/HD. I think it's the DSM-5 we're up to, and they call it ADD/ADHD. So it'd be attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, two of the points that the website brings up right away is that ADD, ADHD, I'm just going to say ADD from now on if you don't mind, is one of the most misunderstood and incorrectly treated illnesses today. Okay, that's kind of a little scary. Don't a lot of our children have ADD? Right? Aren't they being treated for that? I know like every male, female, a lot of females too in my family have been diagnosed with this. So it's a little scary to think that it's one of the most misunderstood and incorrectly treated illnesses. Think of what that means for a family like mine, or maybe a family like yours, if you're listening to this, that it's being incorrectly treated. That's a little scary. Okay, fact number 2, another factoid from the website, amendclinics.com. According to the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, 20% of boys and 11% of girls are being diagnosed with it. So that's 1/5 of boys and approximately 1/10 of girls have ADD in some form. Now, the traditional forms you're going to see on the in the DSM-5, and when you go and get treatment, for the most part, I'm going to teach you how to get treatment that's, I think, is going to be a lot more effective. I mean, it's not just me. They actually have a national call center. There's a whole bunch of people who use the amend techniques and use that kind of paradigm in order to treat it. So it is getting more and more popular. He's been on PBS with like these like tremendous like 6-hour shows, and so it's people are kind of getting a hold of this. But for people who don't know yet, who maybe don't watch PBS all the time like I do, or aren't on the internet researching whatever problem they have all the time, I really hope this can help you, because some other things we go into, people who have untreated ADD or they're being incorrectly treated, higher incidence of academic problems. My father was infamous for this. He luckily was the son of a professor, and that's how he got through school and college and graduate school. And it's he had a lot of learning disorders and stuff like that. He was supposedly dyslexic as well, although that may have been misdiagnosed. So there was a lot of things going on with him that led to academic problems, like a chronically low self-esteem, depression, job failure. Some of you may be really good at doing your job up to a certain point. Then you kind of lose control of it, or you do things at the job that you don't really mean to do. That those things kind of happen normally, but let's say it's more of a track record. Like, it's one thing if you have like a really highly stressful job and you kind of have a meltdown every couple of years, but if you're kind of flipping out all the time and you're always losing jobs because of it, that might be something you want to look into. Of course, incarceration is a big deal. A lot of people with add, they have a higher incidence of incarceration, obesity, divorce, and also Alzheimer's. That's pretty scary. I've also heard Parkinson's can be in this, but the website didn't say that. Now, we also have a much higher high school dropout rate, and about half, 52%, abuse drugs and alcohol. When we're talking about somebody with a mental disorder abusing drugs and alcohol, often it's under kind of a self-medication. Like, let's say you have, now go into some of these different forms of ADD that Dr. Amin goes into. Let's say you have certain parts of your brain that are getting a much higher blood flow than they need. You may go to drinking to kind of try to lower the blood flow, to kind of use it as a nervous system depressant, kind of slow down your mind. Or maybe you'll be into stimulants in order to kind of get some of these brain areas to try to get some more blood flow to that. You don't know what you're doing. It's kind of like when you have you're low in potassium and you crave a banana. Somehow your body knows, but you're not really consciously aware of it. So what we have here, I'm going to go over some of these parts of ADD. The first thing would be like the core symptoms, right? So this is going to be across the board for all 7 types that the Amen Clinic goes into. So you're going to have a short attention span for like routine, everyday chores, everyday tasks. Like homework is very difficult for people with ADD. You're going to have a certain level of distractibility. Some people are worse than others, but it's definitely worse than normal, or like a normal child. Now we have also organizational problems, running late. Their areas are very disorganized. You see a lot of people with really disorganized apartments, or maybe even as children, their rooms. There's also a problem with procrastination and follow through. They don't get to the point where they're doing something, that's procrastination, that they need to do, but also when they do it, they don't actually finish it. Now, there's also one that's very important, and this is tied to lower blood flow to the prefrontal cortex, which is kind of like your executive functioning part of your brain. And you're going to have, that's where your impulse control is. I'm infamous for this. Whenever I'm in a situation where I'm with multiple people, or it's just kind of busy and loud and noisy, I may say or do something that just kind of falls out of my mouth. I had an ex-girlfriend who was like that, and she had a cute little mechanism where she'd say, "Oh, that didn't stay in the bubble, did it?" Like, she would have a thought and it would just pop right out of her mouth, and there wasn't much control over it. So you'd have this sort of impulse, and you just kind of go with it, and you're not really in charge. You know, executive in charge, executive functioning. Okay, so what do we got? So then we go on to like the classic ADD. Now this is the ADD that's usually evident early on in life. It could be even as a baby. You might be a colicky, active, or a great word is wiggly kind of baby. As a child, you'll tend to be kind of like noisy and talkative, very impulsive and demanding. And because it's very kind of like hyperactive and conflict driven, this is going to get noticed pretty early on. That's the part that's often called ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, as you get older, you may start out with ADHD, and then you would go more into a one of the forms of ADD, because what usually happens is people just don't have the energy to keep it up. It's just too exhausting. So other traits start coming out, other ways to deal with these kind of blood flow problems to the brain. Okay. Now, one of the things that practitioners in ADD that are treating these children, these child psychologists, they'll often notice that the parents of the kids are very tired and overwhelmed, often embarrassed, because they have these kind of non-stop, hard-to-control children. And this is the type of ADD that's often called ADHD, and is often more seen in boys. So what's some of the common symptoms? As we mentioned before, inattentive, easily distracted, distractibility, disorganized and impulsive, poor follow-through, trouble listening when others talk to them, like they're always getting distracted by something else. Normally, if somebody, especially if you're a child and an adult is, let's say, twice your size and 3 times your weight, you're going to pay attention to them when they speak. But ADD kids, often they're unable to pay attention. It's not like a defiance. It's just like they can't. No matter what they do, no matter how much you scare them, they're not going to be able to. Maybe that's false if you go like really traumatic, but then again, you're causing problems there too. There's often like these careless mistakes, poor attention to detail. You see that kind of as people are growing up in their homework. They go to college, they make all these mistakes in their, they do reports, they do work for school, and they just like make these kind of careless mistakes all the time. Also, they're very forgetful, which kind of sounds like, wait, is this connected to Alzheimer's somehow? I remember I mentioned before Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It seems like ADD children already have a sort of forgetfulness to them, a restlessness, being fidgety. It's really hard for them to wait their turn. Again, not because they're being defiant, but because it's just really difficult for them. Now, one of the things they say, it's they act as though they're kind of driven by a motor. They use that a lot, and a lot of them don't even know what that means in the business. It's kind of like, again, it's not their choice, right? Like they could be kind of tired, but they still kind of have to move. I remember when I was a kid, not a kid actually, because I have adult ADD. I had a friend who used to call me Sharky because I always had to kind of keep moving. I was a lot slower than I was as a kid because I was tired. This stuff is exhausting. But it's not a choice, and that's really what we have to kind of nail down. And also, I know it's easy as a parent to kind of think, oh, he's defiant, she's not paying attention. Remember that if they have a disorder like this, and you get them checked out for it, and it comes through that they do, remember that these aren't choices that they're making. It's literally how their brain is working. And they may be as miserable with it as you. In fact, we'll go to some of the symptoms of a lot of these. Like here, you're going to get a problem, the next 3. Being noisy, talking excessively, and interrupting others. Okay. These are things that make like the classic ADD much more noticeable. So somebody who has it like this, people are going to really be able to kind of put their thumb on it and figure it out. And now when we have these SPECT images, remember I said it's a measure of blood flow. Now they have normal activity when they're resting, right? When they're in a calm mood. And some of you parents of ADD kids would be like, when's that? Like that never happens. But let's say they're in like one of those rare restful periods, of contentment. They actually have normal activity, but during concentration, there actually tends to be decreased activity. Think about that. When you concentrate, there's supposed to be increased activity to your brain, to the prefrontal cortex and your executive functions. So they have the opposite. And this is going to be for all the ADDs, right? There's going to be some sort of diminishment in the prefrontal cortex. And it's actually, they even go and they call it the underside of the prefrontal cortex. Also the cerebellum and the basal ganglia. So you have this kind of decreased activity in these three areas for classic ADD, but for all of them you're going to have decreased in the prefrontal cortex. Okay, and it goes into kind of setting the body's idle speed. Like the basal ganglia, that's actually deep within your brain, towards the actual brain stem. And that's let's see, it produces dopamine. It's critical to motivation. A lot of people with certain types of ADD they're not motivated, and people will think, oh, they're very lazy or this or that. No, they really can't control it. It's not a matter of them choosing to be unmotivated. They're just unmotivated. You know, there's literally less blood flow to the part of the brain that's responsible for that. And I'm trying to, explain this in several different ways. The basal ganglia is also responsible for attention and setting the body's idle speed, like I mentioned before. So think about that. If the basal ganglia isn't working correctly, if it's not getting the blood flow that it needs, you're literally not controlling your idle speed on your engine right. So you could have, let's say, there's actually an idle screw in cars near the engine, or somewhere in there, right? I've never actually played with one. Not the smartest idea, so I've always left it alone. But I know about it. And let's say your idle speed's supposed to be like 800 RPM. When people with ADD, their idle speed may be more like 2,000. And that's why it's almost torturous, this whole like driven by a motor thing. So that's classic ADD. Now, in the, what's it called, the DSM, you're also going to get what's called inattentive ADD. Now, this is the second most common type, according to the DSM. I don't know how true that is. This is more like the quiet, introverted, daydreamer. Like I said, a lot of people label them as slow or lazy because they're unmotivated, but they're medically unmotivated. It's common, but it's often missed because they tend to have fewer behavioral problems. And as people age and go into adult ADD, they tend to have more of an inattentive type. It comes out more in that way. So they don't draw the negative attention to themselves that those with classic ADD would have. So even though they're kind of sitting there crying for help, they're a lot harder to hear. So what's some of the stuff, in addition to the kind of core ADD things, what do the inattentives have? Trouble focusing. I've always had that. Easily distracted, disorganized, poor follow-through. Trouble listening when others talk to them, just like the classic. Problems with time management. They're always late. They tend to be very late. They lose things. They just forget where things are. They make careless mistakes. Forgetfulness, again. Like I said, this is related to Alzheimer's. Excessive daydreaming. Their mind just flutters off. They complain about being bored a lot. They're also kind of, people around them kind of think that they're always tired and sluggish or slow moving. Or they appear spacey or preoccupied, or flaky is another word people use. And this is a great example of why the term attention deficit hyperactivity doesn't fit all the ADD types. So a lot of times what happens is this is very often with girls. They actually get, for whatever reason, they get an attentive ADD more than the boys get. Although both have both, it just tends to kind of sway one way or the other. And unfortunately, they tend to be ignored and just kind of called spacey, and and it's unfortunate because they really do need help. And having a lot of these symptoms, I'm sure you could just hear and go, wow, that's pretty torturous. Like, how can you live with that, right? So I really hope that this helps people kind of figure out what's going on. Now, there's a couple other types, and this is what Amen is really known for. One of them is overfocused ADD. Now, they have most of the ADD features, but their difficulty is not in being able to pay attention, but in shifting their attention. They actually become very hyper-focused on things, and they'll tune everything out. So when a normal human being would be distracted by something, they're the opposite. Now they'll get into they'll get stuck. They'll get locked into different thought patterns. Often they're negative thought patterns, and also negative behaviors. And this is the type of ADD that they associate with substance abusers. And this is something I saw on the website that was pretty interesting, as well as the children and grandchildren of alcoholics. Now, my grandfather was an alcoholic, and when I took the Amen test on amenclinics.com, amenclinics.com, there's actually a test you can take, and in that test, one of the things that came up was overfocused ADD, and I hadn't read this until today when I was researching it, but they tend to be the children and grandchildren of alcoholics. That fits me, and it's almost kind of eerie similarity. Now, so what are you going to get with this overfocused? Now, we talked about kind of the core symptoms of ADD, but also you're going to get like this excessive and senseless worrying, right? Sometimes it's called anticipatory anxiety. You have to go and do something. It's not that big of a deal, but you're having a heart attack. Sometimes this could be kind of mistaken for a kind of panic disorder, but it's not as bad as panic. It's just that it's just constant. It's constant. It doesn't let up. With panic, it tends to be more acute. You get like an episode of panic, and it's triggered by something. With these overfocused ADD patients, it's just there all the time. And so you're going to get stuck in, like I mentioned before, these loops of kind of negative thinking. They tend to become very oppositional and argumentative. That's me. They also tend towards compulsive behaviors. That was me. Difficulty seeing options. That's another one that's big. That's how adults operate. You look at what your options are and you try to choose the best one. But if you can't see the options, good luck adulting, right? That's going to really tear down at least part of your adulting skills. Excessive worrying, that's kind of a repeat. Excessive or senseless worrying. Tendency to hold grudges. Oh, wow. Yeah, I've definitely been told that. But the big thing is difficulty shifting your attention from subject to subject. You're just caught in something. Also, there's a tendency to hold on to your own opinion, no matter how uneducated it is, how emotional it might be, and you don't listen to others' input. Like, you don't even hear them. You're just waiting to speak. You're waiting to argue with them. Being argumentative for some reason is fun. It's something that kind of, I guess it's something to kind of, it's almost like thrill-seeking. Oh, and this is also, they get a bit Rain Man-ish, like they need things to be done a certain way. And if it's not, if they're like watching somebody they just asked to like clean their toilet, and it's not done, and they go counterclockwise instead of clockwise with the toilet brush, they might get upset at that. And it's not like they're gonna like jump on people with knives in their mouths like they're some sort of pirate from the 17th century. It's just that they're getting internally upset. And with this, the kind of whole hyperactive thing, sometimes with, sometimes without. It depends. It can be both. Now, where's the actual SPECT imaging? I'm going to talk about this with every type. They have increased activity at rest and during concentration, but it's in the anterior cingulate gyrus. And they also have decreased activity in the underside of the prefrontal cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. Okay, now you can kind of Google some of these things. I actually have like a list, a big old thing, that shows all the brain types, so I could explain it a little bit better. But I can't find it because I have a tendency to lose things. Doesn't that sound familiar? So, now we're up to another type, temporal lobe. Now, when we go into these kind of lobe ones, it's going to be a little bit harder. It's temporal lobe, limbic, ring of fire, and what's called anxious. Now, these lobes are responsible for different things. So the next two, I hope I don't confuse you too much, but just accept it's a part of the brain that does X, Y, Z. Okay. Now, there are, of course, always the core symptoms, but also because we're talking about the temporal lobe, you're going to have issues with learning, memory, moodiness, aggression, like temper tantrums, and sometimes even violence, kind of like that unknown violence where it just kind of happens, like you didn't mean to do it. And also, for some reason, this has been associated with head injuries. So sometimes you may have other types of ADD, and you get a head injury, and then this one pops up in addition to it. So you're going to have, as well as the core symptoms and the things I mentioned, there's going to be memory problems again. Now, this one is really interesting. I've had a really big problem with this all my life, actually. Auditory processing issues. Now, what does that mean? That means that you hear somebody speaking, you know they're speaking, and it's loud enough for you to hear it. It's just that for some reason you can't process it. This happens a lot when somebody's talking in a thick accent. But it can also just happen if somebody's kind of mumbling a bit, and it can also just happen someone's talking to you and your brain's just not getting it. And it's really hard to explain unless you've gone through it what that feels like, because it's a very you feel really embarrassed because you keep asking people what they're saying, and they're talking plenty loud, so they're gonna get mad eventually after like the fifth time you ask them to repeat themselves, right? So it's kind of like what you start doing is you kind of like pretend you heard them. Like, oh yeah, that. And you just kind of like, you guess what they said and hope that they said it and act accordingly. And sometimes you could be blatantly wrong. So what a lot of people do is they get kind of a sense of humor about it. And they go, oh, I thought you said, like I always used to use sexual innuendos. Oh, I thought you said, big black dildo, and people will laugh and they'll kind of forgive you for like constantly mishearing them, thinking that you're just playing around or being coy, right? But you really just can't understand what the hell they're saying. And with certain, I hate to say it, I hope this doesn't sound racist, but with certain, especially Indian accents for me, and for other people in my family, I've noticed the same thing, that certain accents are just very, very difficult to understand what they're saying. And of course, you put in like episodes of a quick temper, irritability. That could be kind of a bad, now you're arguing with somebody because you couldn't hear what they were saying, and they're getting mad at you, and now you're getting mad at them for getting mad at you. Also, you'll have like these periods of, confusion. Again, kind of like Alzheimer's, dementia. So that's kind of what I've always been afraid of. Also, you can get periods of panic and fear for no reason. It just kind of comes out. Like I said, this is associated with head injuries, so you're kind of talking, you're basically talking a little bit of brain damage, right? I'm not a doctor, but that's what it sounds like to me. By the way, my official disclaimer, I'm just a guy named Bry. I've studied a lot of these things. I think I have a lot of these things. And I'm hoping that this helps, but I'm not trying to replace your doctor. And I'll explain to you at the end how you can get, how you could find one of the Amen clinics or one of the doctors that uses the Amen methods in order to help yourself out. Because in my own personal history, I don't think I've spoken to a psychologist or a therapist who even knew this existed, who even knew that there were 7 types of ADHD, who even knew about this theory. Or maybe they kind of brushed upon it in school, but they don't use it in practice. You're either inattentive, classic ADD, so it's hyperactive, inattentive, or mixed. You get both somehow. And that's it. And if you don't respond, because you'll see with some of these, you put somebody on a stimulant or just a stimulant, you're really going to hurt them. You're going to make things worse depending on the type of ADD they have. So I really hope people don't go through that. In a lot of ways, I'm lucky. I was never really treated for my ADD because I have panic disorder and I have clinical depression. So they would always kind of focus on that and like, yeah, when we get that solved, which will never be solved, then we can move on to the ADD. So I actually got records from one of my doctors recently, and there's no mention at all of ADD. So it's, even though we talked about it, and we were sure that I was, and he just never mentioned it, because it wasn't important, because the real problems were X, Y, and Z, and sometimes the ADD gets overshadowed, even if it might be contributing. Like this, periods of panic and our fear for no reason. Is that panic disorder? I mean, can it be mistaken for panic disorder? Sounds like it could be. We're playing with symptoms that are basically the same. Now, here's another thing that you might get if you have this kind of ADD. Again, often associated with head injuries. Visual changes, like you see shadows or objects changing shape. So it's almost like a little bit of a hallucination. It's just that, you're not seeing your dead grandmother. Things are just kind of changing shape a little bit. Again, that's kind of indicative of some brain damage. Episodes of deja vu more than usual. I mean, I get deja vu maybe like once every, couple of weeks. I have no idea if that's normal or not, but if you're getting deja vu like through the course of your day, you got a problem. And it's like every day. We also have this thing where we call people sensitive. That could be kind of a symptom or a hallmark. And they could even be mildly paranoid. So it's very hard to tell if they're schizotypal or if they're, going through some sort of ADD. And that's why a lot of these things have been kind of, it seems like things could be an ADD route, they can be a complex PTSD route, or they can be the traditional route. And, it seems like someone just tosses a die and sticks with the traditional route no matter what they get. Now, one of the things that's very common is headaches or abdominal pain with no origin that's obvious. You didn't eat like a bunch of spicy food. You weren't listening to really loud music and now you have a headache. You're just getting them out of the blue. Now, dark thoughts, which may be suicidal or homicidal. With depression, you're not usually going to have homicidal thoughts. But with this type of ADHD, you may have go back and forth between suicidal and homicidal. And then, of course, learning disabilities are very heavily correlated. So if you have learning disabilities, then you may want to look into this type, temporal lobe. And now we got another one that's a lobe one. Oh, I didn't go over the brain activity. So the SPECT scan findings show decreased activity and occasionally increased activity in the temporal lobe at rest and during concentration, as well as decreased activity underside of prefrontal cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. That's like your basic ADD when you have that decreased activity in those three areas. And it decreases during concentration. Like I said, when you need it to increase, it decreases. Not fun, right? And you can kind of feel for these people once you start realizing what's actually going on, because so many times, they're lazy, or they're defiant, or they're just a bastard, or she's just a bitch, right? Like you think like that, and it's like, wow, if they're going through this, maybe they're not completely evil people, right? I'm thinking there probably are some evil people, but people going through these disorders, I think we should at least look into it, right? Especially if it's our children. Or maybe you're a child and you have an adult ADD parent. That's what I went through. I mean, I was ADD myself, but then I had a parent that was severely ADD. And it was, you start attributing things to them that aren't really happening because they're not under control of it. They're just kind of trying to control it, trying to make up for it sometimes, but they're not in control of it. So I'm going to kind of go into limbic ADD and go straight into what's going on with the blood flow. And the SPECT images typically show increased deep limbic activity at rest and during concentration. And then, of course, the decreased activity in the prefrontal, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglia during concentration. So even though, like during concentration, you would want to see some increased activity, but it's also at rest. So this thing is just turned on, like somebody flipped a switch, and your limbic system, the limbic part of your brain, is just turned on. I think they might have had that interactive during while the deep. I'm just checking on something. Okay, now what is the... Okay, they said it a different way in another paragraph, and I got a little confused, which is pretty easy to do when it comes to me. Now, what is the limbic area responsible for? Your emotional tone, how happy or sad you are. So this area is just overactive, like always overactive, whether you're concentrating or not. You're just always overactive. Depression is associated with overactivity in the limbic area. And there's really only one way to tell between limbic ADD and depression is to look at the SPECT scans. There's some subtle differences. So you can kind of figure it out and figure out what would be the best way to do it. Now, as I'm going over this, I've seen this a few times, and it sounds a lot like depression. Okay, so you have your core symptoms, then you have moodiness, negativity, low energy, frequent irritability, tendency for social isolation, feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, guilt, loss of interest in things that used to make you happy. That's called anhedonia in depression, at least. I don't know if they're going to call it the same thing in here. Sleep changes where you're either an insomniac or a hypersomniac, so you could sleep very little or sleep a lot. Chronic low self-esteem, not episodes of it, but really just always low self-esteem. So like I said, this one, there are some minor differences in the brain scans, and that's really the best way to tell if you have this type of ADD or depression. And sometimes you get both. That's happened too. So that's limbic ADD. And that's a little scary because there's different treatments for people with limbic ADD and for people with depression. So you really have to be careful on figuring out which one is which. Now, here's what he's really known for. Now, this is called Ring of Fire ADD. Now, there's this kind of like patchy increased activity in a bunch of areas of the brain. So it looks like it's like a ring. It's more like a horseshoe because the front is also diminished, just like in all the other ADDs. And there's a bit of variability too because, like I said, it's patchy. And it's often kind of, you have to look at it and wonder if they're bipolar or also bipolar. So that's why the SPECT data is really important. So there's kind of like an overall high activity in the brain. They have difficulty turning off their brains. They feel overwhelmed with thoughts and emotions. Not the intensity of them, it's just that they won't stop. They don't do well on stimulants, at least alone. So you do not want to give them the typical, like, I remember I got some medicine once for ADD, and it literally just said amphetamine. That's it. And that's not something you want to put somebody on if they have Ring of Fire. Now, here's some things they point out. It can be related to allergies, infections, or inflammations in the brain, or it can be related to bipolar. Now, like I said, there's subtle differences, and you need to look at a SPECT scan. That's the easiest way to figure it out, or else you're kind of cherry picking with the symptoms and trying to figure out, is it this symptom? Is this symptom, which are very close? You're trying to figure out these really subtle differences. Just get the goddamn scan, all right? Now, they say with kids with ADD, these problems are all the time, whereas bipolar children tend to kind of cycle between, mania and depression, and sometimes being in between and being normal. So there's this kind of cycle. It's almost like a sine wave, and they're going through that. And the sine wave for a normal person is pretty flat. Theirs has much higher zeniths and much lower peaks. And that's where bipolar, you're literally going to both poles. Now, bipolars also have episodes of mania, while adults with bipolar have episodes of mania, while adults with Ring of Fire ADD do not. They don't go manic. And it's possible to have both conditions, and some researchers say as much as 50% of people with bipolar also have a form of ADD. So what are kind of the weird things you might find if you have Ring of Fire? You're going to have a sensitivity to noise, light. This is the thing with clothes where, tags, different fabrics are very uncomfortable. Also, any kind of, sometimes being touched is like very grating. It's very uncomfortable. And then you have these like mood changes of high and low, but not as high and low as bipolar. But again, like I said, these differences are sometimes hard to figure out. Rigid thinking, often oppositional. They demand to have their own way, almost like in a childish way. Periods of mean, nasty, or insensitive behavior, where they just kind of happen. Periods of increased talkativeness. Sometimes you have a quiet person, and you can't shut them up sometimes. And you wonder where the hell did that come from? Unpredictable behavior, increased impulsivity, but in periods, grandiosity, larger than life thinking, but not thinking they're Jesus. Maybe more like thinking they could win the lottery. They tend to talk really fast, racing thoughts. They appear anxious or fearful. And this is one that may or may not have hyperactivity. So, again, this is difficult to kind of tell, and you need the SPECT scans to do that. So if you're being treated for ADD and no one's giving you any kind of SPECT scans and trying to figure out what your brain patterns are showing, I really suggest that you go to an MN practitioner and see if they can treat you a little bit differently, especially if you've had unsuccessful treatment. If you have a treatment that works for you, good for you, right? But you really have to look at these things if things aren't working out so well. Okay, and now here's the last one, and I came up positive for this. I have like 4 types of this stuff. And you're going to find that sometimes when you take the MN test, you'll probably get 3 or 4. That doesn't mean that you're crazier than everybody else. It just means that this is possibly what it is, because a lot of the symptoms overlap, right? This isn't easy, and that's why most people don't do it. Most people who are trained to deal with ADD, they barely know the definition of it in the DSM, much less all the other stuff out there about it. So it's you really got to get to the right types of professionals to get this treated right. And that is my non-doctor's opinion, but having gone through it, having kind of noticed all the ADD in my family, I think it's pretty important. It can really improve the quality of life if you're treated correctly. Now, this is the one that I said they listed me as this one too. Not necessarily, like I said, there was 3 more they listed. Now this one's a little bit different because there's low activity in the prefrontal cortex, right? Just like all the other ADDs, but there's actually overactivity in the basal ganglia. So now you have this kind of really high idle speed again. I forget the other one had the same thing. So the symptoms tend to be kind of magnified by the anxiety. So you have to kind of calm and stimulate the brain at the same time. And I've often wondered how they do that. A lot of times you get like an antidepressant, more of an SNRI than an SSRI, and also some sort of, you might get that. They might try a stimulant with it. They might try that, a stimulant, and like a clonazepam or a benzodiazepam. There's a lot of things they could try, but it's always kind of like, and this is the problem that I always see, if you have certain brain areas that are underactive and other brain areas that are overactive, a lot of these things are going to kind of work on the whole brain, and they're going to make the whole brain more active. That's why you don't want to only give a stimulant to somebody who has ring of fire, because their problem is overactivity in this huge ring around the brain. So what do you do? And that's where my understanding ends. Evidently, certain chemicals work on certain parts of the brain. I don't know how, but somehow it does. So let's just accept it and hope that it works. Now, these anxious ADD people are going to have all the other symptoms of, regular ADD, classic, but they're frequently anxious and nervous, like as part of the course, right? They're anxious and nervous just sitting around. They get physical stress symptoms. Now, one of the things people don't understand, there's this word that's been thrown around in pop psych called psychosomatic. And that means that some sort of stress is causing a symptom. It could be, disease stress, a stress to the body. Maybe your immune system is fighting something, so that's a big stress. It could be literal, like emotional emotional stress, psychological stress, etc. And when you have a psychosomatic illness, it doesn't mean that it's fake. That's hypochondria. Psychosomatic illnesses are just caused by some sort of stress. You see the difference? So the people aren't lying that they have these wicked headaches or that, certain things hurt all the time. It's just that it's caused by something that's not, a bug. It's not a virus or a bacteria. It's not our usual model of disease. It's caused by some sort of stress to the body and often emotional stress. So when these things pop up, we kind of call them fake, but they're not fake because you can't help that happening, right? Unless you maybe, drug yourself. And that's why people self-medicate, because these things pop up and they can be very painful. Like think about people who get these wicked stress headaches. That's very painful. It's there, it's real, and it's very painful, and they can't get rid of it without some sort of drug. All right, so I just want people not to think that psychosomatic means fake, because sometimes your doctors will mention this, and they say, I think it's psychosomatic, and you get mad, like, oh, I didn't say it was fake. No, I didn't say hypochondriac or hypochondriacal. I said psychosomatic. There's a big difference. Okay, so what are some of the things that happen with them? These stress symptoms, like I said, stress-caused kind of illnesses like headaches, pains all over, tendency to freeze in social situations. Yeah, I've definitely had that. Dislikes or gets excessively nervous speaking in public. I knew a girl who actually got nosebleeds every time she tried to talk in front of more than, let's say, 5 people. Like you couldn't talk, like stand up and tell an answer in class without getting a nosebleed. Poor girl, right? Also, you're constantly predicting the worst, which makes sense because maybe that's why you're getting so nervous about speaking. You've become very conflict avoidant. There's a disorder in the ICD, which is like the International Classification of Disease. That's used in America. Instead of the DSM, I think they use the ICD-9 in Europe and other Western countries outside of the United States. And they have something called adjustment disorder. And that may be one of these forms of ADD or a mix of a few of them. Conflict avoidant, fear of being judged. I grew up with that very heavily. Now, when I talk about this stuff, I am being medicated. I may not be being medicated correctly, or it may be incomplete. So sometimes I even have to kind of think back, and was that what I was going through? Because you want to forget. You don't want to remember, because my life was kind of one long panic attack, it felt like. And it was very, very stressful. Extremely traumatic in that. I don't know if my life was really that traumatic, as far as, let's say, if someone didn't have the same brain as me. But it was definitely very difficult for me, because I was always kind of in this mode. I remember being left alone as a very early, more like a tween or preteen, whatever it's called, and thinking there were people at the window all the time, slightly paranoid, but not, I wasn't hallucinating or anything like that. Or, oh, by the way, when they talk about hallucinations, the big one is actually auditory hallucinations. You hear sounds, sometimes even voices, but most likely it's kind of like sounds that are kind of, you see people looking around like they just heard something and there wasn't anything to hear. And that's more common with people who have hallucinations. Visual hallucinations are usually for the drugs. Like you got to be on some kind of really heavy drug for that to happen. You almost kind of enter into a dream state. So that's something that's a little bit misunderstood. I'd like to just put it out there. Again, trying to educate people. Now, what's cool is I don't have a 45-minute limit anymore. I kind of upgraded myself. I am now a broadcaster. Not quite an anchor man, but I am a broadcaster. So I could do up to 5 hours, I think, live. And I'd love to do that at some point, to really get some call-ins and to get people really talking about this. So if you have any interest in that kind of thing, or if you think that's a good idea, I mean, it might take me a while. I tend to have a lot of technical difficulties. But if that's something you think would help you, and I get a bunch of people doing that, I'm going to push really hard to do that. Today is Thursday. I really planned this for yesterday, but I kind of got held up with a bunch of social services stuff. I'm still not too quick on the draw with that kind of stuff. I really suck at paperwork, and I lose things constantly. So it got delayed, but I'd like to do every Wednesday. And I think an hour is pretty good, so you don't get too bored of my voice. But I'm going to try to fill an hour with a lot of information. Now, speaking of that, I already mentioned the website. Hopefully you're on a computer or on your phone. Remember, amendclinics.com. It's gotten really nice, by the way. Also, there's a national call center, and I think there you could kind of find someone near you that could help you. I would definitely suggest taking the first test for ADD, so you could tell them, oh, I have this type and that type, or they're saying I might have this type and that type and this type, and then you could really kind of get down to someone who really specializes in that, maybe. Now, I don't have the money to go to one of these yet, but I really do wish all of you luck, and please, tell me what happens. I've read a lot of the books from Dr. Amen, and I've looked through his website, his videos, and I'm pretty impressed. It sounds like it really makes a lot more sense than the model we're working with. And unfortunately, we may be giving some of our kids, at least a subset of those kids, are getting the wrong treatment, or they're getting half of it, getting an incomplete treatment. And I really hope we could do something about that, because this is going to really affect the rest of their lives, right? What you do in school when you're young is pretty important. That whole thing of the permanent record we all used to get threatened with. Okay, that's more like people like me. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about, and definitely go to MN Clinics, there are some protocols to help with any type of ADD or ADHD treatment. And these are going to kind of help diminish the symptoms, and hopefully, I forget which one, I think it was temporal or limbic, there was some sort of allergy thing going on, or they suspect it. So if you could diminish your symptoms without taking a drug or taking less drugs, that's always the best thing to do. So you're going to have to go through kind of a protocol. And if you do go to an ADD, ADHD therapist from this type of style, they're probably going to tell you this anyway. So I just want you to be prepared. But don't get scared off. I'll tell you why in a second. Okay, avoid all simple carbohydrates. Sugar, white bread, pasta, potatoes, like the white foods, right? Now, you'd be surprised. I actually used to probably have about as much sugar as everybody else. Then I read this, and also I had a rheumatologist, because I was getting kind of like a chronic inflammation in my joints. I still have it, but it's gotten a lot better. It's not painful just kind of sitting around. Now I actually have to do something. Like I tried to play guitar today for the first time in a long time, and my fingers were just dying. Oh my God, was it painful. But if now I'm just holding papers and I'm fine, right? But before it would be just as painful just sitting around holding a paper. So getting rid of these kind of these sugary foods, I would definitely go like for the donuts and stuff like that first. Um, just cut down as much as you can. Um, Pasta, I don't really like anyway. I'm Italian and I don't like pasta too much, probably because I had so much of it, and it actually might have been making me sick. Potatoes, I'm pretty digging that. Um, I'll even have some bread, but it'll usually be like a little garlic bread, you know. So it's all good, but definitely try to get your sugars down as much as you can, and of course you don't want to be a diabetic. Um, Now there are also yellow foods you might want to avoid that have a lot of simple carbohydrates like bananas and corn. Um, Also, you're going to have fruit juices like apple juice. Now, everyone's mother told them not to drink apple juice, I think, right? In fact, I have apple juice because sometimes I add it as a little flavoring to seltzer, because they don't have like an apple flavored seltzer. But, a couple teaspoons of that isn't going to hurt. But drinking a glass of apple juice, that's a lot of sugar. So there's a lot of sugar in our diet, and you really have to kind of avoid it. But what's good about it is as you avoid it, it gets kind of like, ugh. Like I can't walk by a Krispy Kreme. The smell is disgusting. It's this kind of like compressed sweetness smell. And also any of the diet stuff that has like the saccharin or any of the fake sugars, they tend to be much sweeter than sugar, and that smells disgusting to me. But I'll take like a fresh fruit, like a strawberry, and it's yummy, right? It's pretty good. I like my fresh fruit, but it's not. It's a much lower level. Like I remember when I was a kid, I was always taught to kind of dip strawberries in sugar. Now it's like, but it's already so sweet. Why would I want to put sugar all over it, right? And you'll get that as you kind of eat less and less sugar. There's kind of an addictive quality to it, and you start noticing that that's not so tasty. It happens with salt too. You'll start tasting things if you cut down on salt. You're like, wow, this is really, really salty. Like McDonald's fries, I can hardly put them on my tongue half the time because they're so salty. It's like a salt lick. What am I, a horse? Right? So when you change some of these things, you're actually going to start reacting to them like, why the hell was I eating this shit? And I got to tell you, never eat British candy or European candy. It's really, really sweet. Right? But you're not going to be eating candy anyway if you're following the protocols. Okay, now over-focused ADD, they want you to have about 60% complex carbohydrates, which is like whole grain foods, brown rice, carrots, green beans, broccoli, spinach, those kind of complex carbos, and about 40% protein, milk, cheese, eggs, meat, poultry, fish, nuts. Now for all other types, they want you to have 60 to 70% protein and about 30 to 40% complex carbohydrates. Now I just got to take their word at it because I don't know. I know with over-focused ADD, something is hyper-focused, right? Something is overactive. So it makes sense that actually it doesn't make sense, but I'm just gonna trust them on it. Okay. Now I already do this aerobic exercise such as running, swimming, or walking. I walk, and I'm kind of crippled. So if I can walk, you can walk. Also, swimming is great. If you have a bad back, especially just kind of walk back and forth across the pool. You're pushing against the weight of the water too. So you're getting kind of a decent exercise, but you're not going to get all sweaty and, pass out or anything. Running, I would do if I still could. But like I said, if you can't, walk and swim. And of course, you could also kind of like walk in the pool, which I love to do because it holds me up, so I can get kind of exercise to my back without re-injuring it. let's see, an anaerobic exercise. Hopefully, you know the difference between aerobic with air, anaerobic without air. You know, like you're not huffing and puffing. You know, like weightlifting, you don't have to, you know, you're not going to be huffing and puffing to get air. So that's why they call it anaerobic. And it's a simplification, but I think you get it. And they also talk about self-disciplinary activities. Karate, judo, yoga, meditation, golf. Golf, it's relaxing, but I wouldn't call it self-disciplinary. Karate and judo, it depends on kind of your state. For me, yoga and meditation are really the best. And yoga is really the best. I know it's some people even have some religious differences with it. But really, throw that aside. Yoga is some good shit. And you get to see women in yoga pants. All right? And I know Muslim countries, they want to cover their women in burqas. But really, they should just be like, okay, no yoga pants, at least. All right? Because that shit drives men wild. It really does. You all look fucking good in yoga pants. Just want to say that to all you women. And supplements. They suggest a good multivitamin, some vitamin C, some B complex. So stuff I already take. Potassium, but don't eat bananas. That's probably why you need to take potassium. Calcium, which everyone should really take anyway. Now they say flaxseed or fish oil. I forget the reason, but flaxseed oil is much, much better. So if you have a choice, take that. There's some sort of health reason, I forget, but you know, that's just something I read, and you know, I've seen it in a few places, so I start to get suspicious when I just don't see it in one place selling flaxseed oil. You know what I mean? And also GABA is also another good one to take. Now, if you're having trouble sleeping, a couple of these, you could become an insomniac, right? Some natural sleep aids. Turkey, warm milk, really does work. One of those sleep hypnosis CDs, they suggest melatonin, GABA again, and valerian root. Also, brain training with biofeedback or neurofeedback, which is like computer training, are both supposed to be very good for ADHD. Now this is going into more of kind of just kind of life advice with it. If you feel you can do more than one thing before an appointment, you can't. You'll be late. Just keep that in your head. In fact, if you could find these protocols, I found this one on the MN clinics. They actually have a bunch of supplements for different types of ADHD. And you can go to www.add-care.com, and I got these protocols there. I don't think it lists like an exact URL. No, for some reason it doesn't. But you might want to print these up just so you know. I'll probably stick them up on my Patreon, like the actual list. You know, hopefully I won't get sued. You can't start something else until you finish what you're working on. Remember, a lot of these types of ADD have a lot of trouble with follow-through. Not just procrastination, but follow-through. It'll take them forever to get to something, and then when they start it, they're going to stop in the middle. Right? Again, they can't help it. It's part of their disease. Do the difficult things first. One of the things I noticed myself doing, one of my ways to procrastinate is to do the really simple things. I might be a little bit different because I'm having a lot of cognitive difficulties lately, and I've had them for a while. So it might be more of my brain isn't up to it. That's what it feels like a lot. But I might just be making excuses. But if you have the choice, do the difficult things first. It's better to get that out of the way and then be able to kind of just go on autopilot and do the easier things later. Okay, put what you're working on away before getting something else out. That's really hard for me because I'm always so afraid I'm going to forget things that I kind of spin around and I'll kind of start five things at once, just so that I know it's there. And that's a way for me to not forget things. But it doesn't really work. I still forget them. It's kind of like putting a string around your finger and then going, oh, what's that string for? Yeah, yeah, that happens to me a lot. Hopefully that's just me. Oh, put it away in a file, not on that pile. I have like 6 piles I'm working off of right now. So that really applies to me. Now here's one. Set your clocks forward a half hour to be on time, but pretend the time is correct. I don't have that much time with being late to things, but I spend way too much energy on like an appointment. To me, it's like I'm so afraid of being late for whatever weird traumatic reason or genetic reason, that I base my whole day around it. Right? Like the first thing I do is like, what are my appointments today? And then I'll like base my whole life around it, and that's created a lot of difficulties, right? You can't always depend on getting off of work, but if you keep kind of the appointment as the number one thing in your life, you may get in a little bit of trouble, right? Write everything down so you don't forget, or and this is great just for everybody. As you get older, you're really going to need to start writing things down. One of the things I do is when I do my jog in the morning, which is really, I just walk around. I literally have like a cane and, like 3 braces. So it's not like I'm going to be jogging anytime soon. I have a headset going into my phone and I record a bunch of stuff. And then I'll try to listen to it later. See if I could, figure out something I might have forgotten. And it's just like a stream of consciousness. It's just a little hard to listen to. But sometimes just the act of saying something into something can really help. Use your phone alarm or computer calendar to remind you when your medication or supplements are due. I have this thing that's like a as seen on TV thing that has like a bunch of little, they're kind of like oval looking, and they're split into 4 parts of the day, and each one is like Monday or Tuesday. Each one is one of the days, and as you take one out, the next one drops. And that's helped me a lot. Just use something to kind of organize yourself with that. Because I've literally taken out my pills, put them on the table, and forgotten if I took them or not, like right there. Like hanging over them. Like I needed to rewind the tape, but there wasn't a tape. So try to get something that'll help you with that, because you don't want to double dose or miss your medication and not even know that you did. Okay? Use active listening skills. Now, when you are talking to somebody, remember there was one of the types where you're talking to somebody and you're just not even hearing them. And people can start to tell, and they get mad at that. That's actually very rude if you don't have ADD. So people get very angry that you're just not listening to them. So what you want to do is you're going to kind of paraphrase, like when they say something, repeat it. So what you're saying is, you're also going to validate, okay, that makes sense, and bond. I'm not exactly sure what you're supposed to do with it, what bonding really means. I think that just kind of naturally comes out of paraphrasing and validating. And you want to kind of share their point of view and listen. Don't debate. Just listen. That's something that all of us with ADD have to practice, because most of the time we're just waiting to speak, right? Because it's almost like our brain is on that motor, that as children our body was on that motor, and now our brain is on it in some way, and we're just waiting to speak. Like we have something in our mind and we're just hoping that someone will shut up so we can say it. And Like I said, it's not on purpose. It's not to be mean. It's just that that's our cross to bear, right? Okay, here's a great one. I wish I would have done this when I was in school. I perpetually was either really, really late with projects or I never did them, ever, right? Um, Never did them at all, I mean. So I missed a lot of projects. I had classes I was an A-plus student in that I almost failed because I missed all the projects. For some reason, it was really, really difficult for me. So what you do is you make the deadline 50% shorter, all right? That way you don't actually miss it. What's going to happen is, let's say it's due in 2 weeks, you make it due in 1 week. You kind of pretend to yourself, that night before, that it's really due tomorrow morning. And you do it, and you're still going to screw it up, right? But then now you have a couple of days to kind of get it done, all right? So that's kind of the mentality behind that. Oh, the manana disorder. Don't put anything off. You won't really do it unless you do it now. And that's, we don't have the same brains or the same skills as other people have. So if they say, oh, shouldn't be a problem, you could leave it to tomorrow. You just say, listen, I'm ADD and I can't. I have to do it now, right? And sometimes it'll be because, people are kind of pressuring us. Like, sit down and eat. Just be like, I have something to do. I'm sorry. And I can't delay it or I'll never get to it. And people will eventually start understanding that you have this issue and won't see you as being antisocial or anything like that. You're just dealing the cards you were dealt, playing the cards you were dealt. And if people don't understand that, well, that's their problem, right? Now, keep a schedule. I have these little schedule books I drag around, and I'll write in them, and people get annoyed, So I'm going to, I whip out a book and I take 3 seconds to do it. That's one of the important things. If you have some sort of scheduling apparatus that you put all your important dates and times in, it's a very good idea. Make sure it's very, you can get to it very quickly so people aren't waiting around for you. All right? Especially if you're in a busy doctor's office and you're kind of holding up the line, writing down the appointment. Try not to do that. Or if you have the book, just jam the card in, ask them to write it down for you, and then jam the card in. And then, at least you have the card in there. Okay, routine is your friend. Make habits such as getting up at the same time every day so you don't have to think about, oh, I got to get up earlier tomorrow. Just make it an everyday thing. And if you have to, let's say, stay up late, then you're going to miss some sleep. Don't sleep in. Right? Just try to keep on a schedule. This also works if you're bipolar. One of the things that you really want to watch is your sleeping patterns. You want to make sure you're in bed at your regular 10 o'clock and you're up at 6. You don't oversleep or undersleep. It can actually make bipolar worse, and it could also make some certain forms of ADD. It can make them worse, but also if you have bipolar on top of it, it may make it harder to tell which one you have or if you have both. So you want to kind of put everything that you can put under your control, and kind of establish a baseline. All right? Okay. Now, people with ADD, and it's just an assertion they're making on the website, they hate schedules, pressure, and demand freedom. However, when they put things off, they feel anxious and like people are criticizing them. If you do things right away, no one can come down on you, and you are truly free from anxiety. So think of that freedom you're demanding as an ADD person. Think of being free from the anxiety is what you really want. All right, especially if you have anxious ADD. Now, whether you take one of the supplements from MN, and I'm not connected to them, I just, in fact, I took one of their supplements. It didn't work too well for me. But I have like 4 forms. I don't know which form it is. You know, according to their test, I have like every form of ADD. So it could just be, you know, my form doesn't work. Now they have like a general ADD care, and I think they have 1 or 2 other ones. So, you know, check that out. I'm pretty sure it's available through MN clinics too. Now remember that whatever you take is going to be like a lifetime thing. You know, this is like a what they call a maintenance medication. Your brain doesn't work right, and you're going to need to give it something to help it work right. And you're not going to really be able to stop. So if you notice some bad side effects, don't think, oh, you know, I'll just stop taking it. No, you got to find a different medication that works for you without whatever this bad side effect might be. So never give up on yourself in that way by going, oh, the medication doesn't work, I don't like this medication, blah, blah, blah. Even with the, like, Adderall, you know, they used to be just amphetamines, but now it's Adderall, Concerta, they're coming out with a new one, like, every year or two. So there's going to be a lot of choices, and one might be better for you, one might not. And there also is the mixes of medications we're talking about for these different types of ADD. And you may need multiple medications. I will say this though, like regular amphetamines are really, really inexpensive. The Adderalls and the Concertas, I don't think are that expensive either. And once they're generic, they're going to be almost as inexpensive as the amphetamines. So you're not talking about this huge outlay of cash. And hopefully if you have insurance and you get everything together, so let's say you weren't working, you're having trouble keeping jobs, maybe you'll be better at keeping your job and you'll only be paying some $4 copay or something. There you go. Okay. Timing is all important. I haven't read this part before, so forgive me if I don't understand it. The sweet spot for either one of their supplements or prescribed stimulants is 8 to 10 on a 0 to 10 scale of alert, focused, and relaxed without side effects. When you begin to feel at about a 7.5, take another dose. Oh, I never heard that before. Okay, that's what they suggest. Now, here's a couple things to remember. If you miss a dose by 2 hours, it'll take half a day to feel at your optimum. I guess you're that 8 to 10 they're talking about. If you eat any simple carbohydrates, it'll take half a day to return to, your 8 to 10. Ugh, half a day. Nah, that donut really gonna fuck you. If you skip a dose, it'll take a full day to return to optimum. If you stay up late and get little sleep, a day to a day and a half before you return to normal. Okay, wow, that's somebody with ADD wrote this. Okay, so you stay up late. It may be a day or a day and a half before you return to normal. If you use alcohol or drugs, it'll take a day and a half to return to normal. So really avoid alcohol and drugs. Now, I used to be a big drinker, and part of the reason was I knew part of my brain was kind of constantly twirling. I used to try to go to sleep, and I'd get these kind of like flashes of motion. Now, I'm laying in a bed. There's no motion, right? I didn't have one of those beds you feed quarters into. There wasn't some sort of weird screen up there, like some 3D ride at one of the amusement parks. But I would feel in my head, I would feel motion, but like really, really fast, like I was in outer space being shot past a planet, right? And it's kind of, I don't know if it was scary, but it was definitely weird. It was definitely a symptom. I don't think most people um, talk about stuff like that. And I really hope that we start kind of talking about stuff like that, especially with younger people, because if they start hearing from somebody who's kind of gotten past this stuff and has been a success and had a good life, or is having a good life, let's not talk about them in past tense quite just yet. Um, but if young people know that there are people who have had these issues that they might be having, and they've gone on to do some good with their life, and are feeling good, content, and not suffering through all the torture that some of these symptoms can be, it will really help them feel a lot less hopeless, right? And I think a lot of people with these symptoms, it's hard not to feel hopeless. You feel like you can't do anything. You feel like you're just not normal, right? That you're always going to be judged as being abnormal, as opposed to just figuring out ways to make everything right for you. So it's something that I think it's great for younger people to hear. Like that weird symptom I had of, these like motion flashes when I was trying to sleep. The sensitivity to sound and light I've always had. Although now I'm in Florida and I love the brightness of it. It's nice, I kind of dig it. But before I hated it. And that may be because of medication. Now I love the beach, right? It's one of my favorite things. At least the pool. Get me in some water on a bright sunny day. Oh, it's a beautiful thing. And you start to kind of find things you enjoy. I know one of the forms of ADD, you start losing interest in things that you used to have interest in. And that kind of anhedonic life isn't fun, It's one thing if you can't do the things that you want to do. That's all of us. That's life, right? Things get in the way. Goddamn paperwork, But if there's nothing you want to do, that's a problem. And it could be depression, it could be clinical depression, or it could be a form of ADD, and you need to go and figure that out. The only thing I know to do is because I don't think people really know about this form of these forms of ADD and how to really treat it unless they're from the MN clinic or been trained by them. And you want a good outcome, or the best outcome you could find, right? So you go to MN clinics, you call up the number, let me repeat it. It is 1-866-260-8227. Again, I don't work for any of these people. I just, it looks to me like they might really be what we should be doing with ADD patients. Now, if you call them up, I think that's replaced their locator, but they might still have a locator. They changed the site quite a bit. It's really pretty now. I don't know if it's as useful, but it's definitely very pretty. So you might have a locator in there where you can just stick in your zip code and it'll come up with MN clinics near you or MN trained therapists or psychologists that can help you with your ADD in whatever form you have or what mix of forms you might have. And I really wish you good luck. All right? And I hope that this whole voice of reason thing isn't about necessarily about politics or it's really just about getting some kind of hopefully correct information or at least putting people on the right track towards something a little bit better. If you don't know about this, I mean, you may completely reject it, um, but you should know about it if you have ADD. That there could be these other forms that your practitioner isn't even aware of, and obviously they can't help you if they're not even aware it exists, right? So if things aren't working, especially, take a look and get the help you need. And I hope by going into depth about stuff like ADD, other mental disorders, and all sorts of things, that we could get like a better education, right? Because somebody that dropped the ball maybe 50 years ago when it comes to educating us, and we haven't been educated. I mean, simply, we haven't been educated in the ways that we need to, and ways that will help our children. Like, think about it. Knowing about ADD isn't just about you. It's about all the children in your life, whether they be yours or your siblings, like your nieces and nephews, or even just the neighborhood kids that maybe you notice, oh my God, no one's paying attention. But just from this like 10 minutes of talking to this kid and maybe buying him an ice cream cone, I could tell like the forms of ADHD he has. And it's not going treated. Maybe I should talk to his parents and see if I could help him out. And I hope that that's kind of the society we're going towards. We talk kind of pie in the sky, love and blah, blah, blah. And I'm all for that. I'm a bit of a hippie. But we also have to think of like really helping people and not just spitting out bumper stickers at them. If everyone believed in love, we'd all be fine. No, we wouldn't. Some things people say are just kind of silly and childish, and we need to really help each other like adults. And this is part of it, getting a bit more of an adult education. So I hope I've done some good, and I hope this is a good first show for Voice of Reason, and I hope most of you get what I mean by Voice of Reason, and just kind of like a reasonable education, and that I want this to be a place where we can get together and do that. And like I said, if you want more of an interactive show where we can talk about these issues, I'd love to, hear any comments you have about that. All right, so this is me signing off on March 16th, Thursday, is it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. And I look forward to your interactions.